wholeness comes from the inside out.
When we're living congruently with our values, there's happiness because there is that sense of wholeness.
Wholeness is when the way of your being matches the truth of your being.
Hugh Vail is one of those masters in life that makes you feel like a soul sibling. His dedication to growth and learning has made him a favorite expert here at the Wholeness Network. I am positive you will feel his gentle, healing heart in this conversation. Hugh is known for Mustang medicine. You must check out one of his events. The transformation you will experience there is beyond words. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Are you really good?
Uh-huh.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Has it been a long few years? Catch me up.
It has been a few years since we last chatted.
Mm-hmm.
Parts of it have been long, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And parts of it have been short. I think the last year, I can't believe the last year has gone by.
Right.
So that part feels like unexplainably efficient.
Okay, well, that's an interesting word.
Yeah. It's just felt so in flow.
Oh, good.
And yeah, I feel like life is very, very efficient when it's in flow. And the more efficient it is, from my perspective, the faster time goes.
Right.
Because I'm not thinking about anything. I'm not trying to force anything. I'm not trying to control anything.
Yeah.
And so then all of a sudden it's like I wake up and then I go to bed. And I'm like,
right.
Wow, that was an amazing day.
Good.
So,
good. I'm glad. That's good. Yeah.
I love that all the posts that you've been making on the Wholeness Network.
Thank you.
It's been good to go back through all of that. And one of my most favorite people ever is Paul Young. And I've gone back and I've watched that video that you guys did. And I just can never get enough of it. I share it with everyone.
Right. I know. He's so amazing.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of Brian McLaren? Okay. So Brian McLaren is kind of in that same circle. And I just got to interview him like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And so William Paul Young and then is like friends with Richard Rohr. Do you know Richard Rohr?
Oh, one of my favorite authors.
Okay. So Brian McLaren is probably going to be the new Richard Rohr. Like
no way.
He works at he works with him
at the center.
Uh-huh. And so his podcast, Learning How to See, you would really like it. Wow. And Richard's on there all the time.
Oh yeah. Okay. You sold me.
Yeah. So he came to town and I was able to meet him actually in person and interview him. And I could have been there for hours. Could have been there for hours. You know what? He's cool because he's a theologian. He used to be a pastor, but he is also very, like science, so it's all that thing. His latest book, which is so good. Do I Stay Christian? That's his latest book.
Ooh. What have you read it yet?
Oh yeah. You'll have to read it.
So what's the conclusion? Like at the end of the chapter, do you feel like you should stay Christian?
Well, what's interesting is that so the book is set up into 3 areas. So area 1, no. That's the whole no.
Yeah.
And he just goes through, here's why. No. Here's all the terrible things.
Because he's really talking about culture. He's talking about how we've organized a way of being into a thing of doing, and it never works that way.
Yeah,
that's very Rohrian.
Yes,
would be.
And the history, and I mean, Martin Luther was instrumental in the Reformation. However, Hitler got most of his understanding of an Aryan nation from Martin Luther's writings.
Yeah.
So there's complexity in these things, right? Like,
Yeah.
and you would love him because he grew up, Brian McLaren grew up evangelical. So he knows all the, like he talked about, he's like, yeah, I was always told about the William Wilberforce. Like that was always like, my tradition stopped slavery. But then he grows up and he's like, wait, we were using Christianity to, we were using the Bible to say that was righteous, so he's like,
I just watched an interview with Ben Shapiro and Sam Harris. And Sam Harris is like, the premise of being Christian in the Bible is that it promulgated the ideas and the culture of slavery.
Yeah.
And Ben Shapiro was like, yeah, but it also inspired the men who abolished slavery.
Yes.
And so you get both sides of it. And
yes.
I think both sides are true.
Right.
Like,
well, that to me, in that complexity is the only place that you're able to actually make a choice. Do you know what I mean? When both appear, that's where the space comes in, that you make a choice. If something wasn't complex, then there's no choice. In fact, so Brian actually has his own like stages of faith, which are simplicity, complexity, perplexity, and harmony.
Ooh, I like that.
You'd like it. So anyway, so the first part of the book is no. The second
And
part of the book, Go ahead. Keep going.
Oh, I just love that they're using the term, and that you're using the term complexity versus complicated.
Yeah.
Because I think both are true. It can be very complicated when you get into historicity of the Bible and all that stuff. But it's actually just complex.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to hold in balance both viewpoints.
Yeah.
To your point, to make your choice.
Yep. And and to look at it as a way of integral kind of maturity level, like going into phases instead of just, hey, pull yourself together. Well, it's like, well, you have to mature in this, in your way of faithing, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So really, really good. Yeah. And then part 2 of the book is yes, and it's yes. And then part 3 is, if yes, how? So, but along, go ahead.
Oh, I really like that perspective, because if I were to drill down what the last like 18 months to 2 years, it's been my articulation of, if yes, this is how, according to Hugh.
Right. Which is, oh man, Hugh, I've missed, the last few years have been huge. Like I've missed having too many people I can go into these deep levels with. So it's been a little bit isolating the last few years, but it's like, there's been huge things. We'll have to talk about that. Like, but honestly, I think that's the ultimate complexity, is as many people as there are as many ways that it's supposed to be.
Well, I had a chance years ago. This is going back like maybe 2012. Might be the time frame.
Yeah.
And I got to sit down with a professor who was the dean of religion at Brigham Young University. I was very pleasantly surprised at his perspectives, particularly at his language and the terms that he would use, and then the definitions. In fact, I took this, I want to say it was it was either a 6-week long course or a 12-week long course. It might have been a 12-week long course. We met once a week, and there was only like 20 of us that were invited to kind of beta test this course out that he was working on. And it was fantastic. And it came with a glossary of terms and definitions. One of the definitions that has stuck with me since then is religion, there are just as many religions as there are people. Because his point of view, his perspective is that religion is a way of thinking, speaking, acting, and believing. And so we all have our own way, the way that we filtered it. And that then creates our patterns and our habits. And that is our religion. Richard Rohr's point, which I found years later, that he speaks about in the universal Christ, is he says that religion, when you go back to the Latin version of the word, it's religio, it's to religament.
Yes.
To find the things that you feel are broken and to make them whole. And I think that's what our religion does.
Yeah.
And that's everything that's in my life, not just the place that I go to church.
Right.
And Chauncey, then the guy I was taking the course from in 2012, he then said, so if that's what religion is, then we also have to define church.
Right.
And he said, your church is the place of where you promulgate your religion. And so it got me thinking, and I was like, oh, that means that coffee is a way of thinking and acting and speaking and believing about coffee.
Right.
And then Starbucks would be a church of coffee. And Beans of Brew would be a church of coffee.
Right.
If Starbucks were to say, we are the only true church of coffee, it would be odd. It would be like, no, coffee's much bigger than you.
Right.
But that is your way of doing it. And so that gets to be one of your religions. And then I was thinking, oh, well, that'd be the same with yoga. It's like yoga is a religion. It's a way of thinking and acting and believing and breathing and moving your body and making peace with things and unifying.
Right.
And then you'd have like Bob's Hot Yoga Studio would be a church of yoga. And if Bob's Hot Yoga Studio was running around telling everyone he was the one and only yoga, like he was the true and only yoga studio, it'd be like, no, yoga is so much bigger than what your studio is able to organize. That's how I was able to make sense with it. And so I totally agree with your point, is like there's like almost 8 billion religions that are out there. Because it's our way of trying to find wholeness within ourselves. Organized religion, I think, is where it separates. That's just religion. This is the debate I always end up getting in with people, because it's like organized religion would be a different term with a different definition. That's just religion.
Right. So
organized religion is, I think, where we get into like God and my version of God and the way that I've been taught it and the way that my organization, the scriptures that they hold canonical and are the way to read it, to interpret it, to experience it. And that's where it's like, no, I think God is too big for that.
I probably told you before, and I've talked about it a few times, but when I was little, I was shown like a square, and I remember being taught like, this is kind of what you'll understand in this realm, and when you move to the next realm, it's like a cube, and so it'll be familiar, but don't get caught in the box. Like, don't get caught in the box. And then years later, that cube all of a sudden turning into a fractal, where it was like, this is never ending. This is everything pivots on the one square, depending on if it's your square, but that doesn't mean it's not all, it's all part of the whole, and it holds its place to keep it all together. But don't get stuck on the square.
There was a time in my life, this is what's so interesting, when I have realized it's bigger. I am so much more loving and accepting.
Right.
I feel like I have so much more space for allowing others to belong, to be nurtured.
Yes.
When I believed it was mine and it fit in the box,
Yeah.
I felt that it wasn't as big. I felt like my belonging wasn't as big. My capacity to nurture, like really nurture, because I think nurturing comes from accepting. And so I guess I'm just thinking about my own emotions of what it felt like in that moment, relating to your moment, where it was like, oh, it is so much bigger, and there's so much more space for all of us, and it doesn't, and what is unifying is of God, and what says it's outside is, I would say, is well, gosh, it would have to also be of God, but it would be me placing judgments and limitations on it.
Right.
Because I think it was Richard Rohr who said, either everything is of God or nothing is of God. You don't have some things that fit outside the box that are of God, and some things inside the box that are not of God, or vice versa. It's like it's like the ego is just as much of God as consciousness is.
Right.
But when you learn to harmonize that, and you've worked through the perplexities of the ego, it's like, oh, it all has a space. It all has a place. It all belongs.
Yeah.
It's just the earthly experience to wrestle with the tree of life, which I think is the world of duality. It's good, it's evil, it's virtue, it's vice, it's light, it's shadow. It's just all of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's how big that's how big it is. I think that's also how big we are.
Well, and I think that's the thing is, you there's patterns of it. If I go and spend time in a kindergarten for not very long, they're going to feel like so many things are black and white. This person's bad, they hate this person, they are hurt, and me, I would be in there and be like, it's all good, like this. First grade comes, and then second, like, this is not what, to me, it would not have those same, it would not, my sensations in my body would not be acting the same way theirs is over what's going on. Because I would just be like, I know that's hard, but you're going to be fine. Like, this is, you're good. Like, but.
Well, it requires wisdom. That's
Different.
what wisdom is the ability to manage the complexity.
Yeah.
And when we're managing it, we're looking at, is this the right thing? Is it happening at the right time?
Right.
Is it happening for the right reason?
Right.
Am I in the right place to engage with this? Wisdom can make a determination as to what is most appropriate for my own human experience, and for the impact that my choices are going to have, with those that I'm sharing this space with. Like, that requires wisdom. And there's a really cool cowboy saying. It says, good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment.
Yeah. Right.
And so it's like, there's still no judgment about it. What there ends up being is discernment. And there's a difference between judgment and discernment.
And I would think part of that is what you choose to bring back from that, I mean, I remember being shown once, here it's like, seems like there's very literal forward and backward, like moving forward or moving backward. And all of a sudden it was like, man, I only have to go a few miles up, where all of a sudden they're forward it doesn't mean anything. Forward is in every direction. So all of a sudden it was like, what's your progression? And it was almost like, if I move forward or whatever that means, what did I gain as I moved there? What perspective do I get to bring back to center? But
that's interesting, because I think of yours then just a few minutes ago when you talked about the square, and then the square becomes the cube.
Yeah.
it's like in the square, in that 2D realm,
Yes.
forwards then has backwards.
Right.
Because it's a two dimension. It's duality.
Right.
It's just there's forwards and there's backwards and there's left and there's right.
Yeah.
But when I can make peace with that perplexity, then I can graduate. I don't know if that's the right word, but then I can move into the cube,
right,
where now I'm in the 3D. So what once was backwards is yet still forward. What once was right is still
right, right. It's still forward. You still progressed. You still had progression because you expanded who you were in any direction.
We're in the I guess if you have duality, there's probably a term I've never thought about it, but then now we're stepping into like triality.
Yeah.
Or I guess the term that they use in quantum physics is plurality. It's like there's multiple options now.
Well, and that's my latest thing, is moving into, the multiverse. Like, is the multiverse the ultimate answer for Christ, in the meaning that the anointed one, Christ's infinite atonement, infinite at-one-ment, is the key, the multiverse. And if I live in the multiverse, then at one point I actually experience every single possibility. I don't know the science as much, but then I literally in another multiverse become the Christ itself. Do you know what I mean? Like, what? Yeah. Like, to me, what if that to me seems like the most whole experience I could have, if I were able to actually experience every single possibility for me and for everyone else.
Yeah, I think that's possible in a world of duality, when you've got your two ways, your two options. In the only way I think that's possible is this concept of the mirror, where everything is a mirror to me. In horsemanship, they say the horse is the mirror to the soul. And you go, oh, well, that's really poetic and that's really cute.
Yeah.
But if the horse is the mirror to the soul, well, then so is the tree.
Right.
So is the dog.
Right.
So is my partner.
Right.
So is everything. And so when people come and they bring their horses to me, it's like I can see into that person's life just by spending 20, 30 minutes with their horse. If I have, so a mirror to the soul means a mirror to your shadows and a mirror to your shine.
Yes.
Right? It's both. So if I've got a horse that meets me at the gate, now I'm starting to see some of your strengths and some of your excellences that are now coming out in the horse, and he's mirroring that.
Yeah.
And then if I have like a horse that I go to put a halter on, and he winces his face away, like, please don't hit me. It's like, oh, now I'm seeing your anger. Right? Because that horse, it doesn't naturally shy away from it unless he's had bad experience with it. And so what is he mirroring of his experiences with the human putting a halter on? Right. So now he's starting to mirror some of the shadow that's there. So a timid horse is an angry human. See how that's mirroring that out? Like, it's the same with the children, right? A timid child is just an angry parent.
Yeah.
And so this concept of the mirror is, I think, a way to see that I am all of it. Right. And if I'm all of it, well, then that means so are my shadows, and so is my shine, right? So is my light. And this concept of the mirror has been so perplexing for me over the last 2 years. I would even say 18 months, because I don't even know if 2 years ago I even got it.
Right.
But now I can't not get it. And and it's like everything is just reflecting back to me. And the mirror removes it. Here's the value of the mirror. The mirror not only shows us that I am everything and everything is me and vice versa, but it also removes me from blame and allows me to step into choice and accountability. Which has really been challenging for me, because if I was in a business meeting and I said, who's accountable for this? It's like, what's really being asked? It's like, who am I to blame? Right? But Brene Brown said there is an inverse relationship between blame and accountability. So you can't have one and the other. And then there's a coach that I go to. His name's Colton Brockbank, and he gave me this fantastic definition of accountability. And he said, accountability is the ability to account for what happened without finding fault.
Yeah.
Now, this is the same concept that we were talking about earlier with Paul Young and that video that he has on your website that he did for you guys. And he says, Christ never did anything out of responsibility.
Yeah.
And his whole concept was that if you take a verb, which is the ability to account or the ability to respond, and you convert it into a noun, right? Now you've got responsibility. It's now a thing when it used to be an action word. And that's where blame and shame reside in the way we communicate in our intention, because we're no longer responding or accounting. We're now finding fault. We're now figuring out who's to be punished.
Right.
And so the mirror is like, well, if everything is just a reflection back to me, well, then I don't want to punish you, because by punishing you, I'd be punishing me. And that's this really hard, once we can get that concept, I think we graduate from the square to the cube.
So let me see if I can make sense of this. So what was, I always talk about our mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual, and that physical body is those sensations that's how we know what's going on. Like that, the communication within the physical body is really our experience. So I
believe emotions are the messengers from God.
Okay. And how do you know those emotions exist? Through some kind of sensation in the body.
Because of a feeling, right?
Yes, a feeling.
They say an emotion is an accumulation of feelings.
Yeah. So when we have this mirror, I would guess when you say I didn't get it, I mean, I think everybody's there. We're not getting it, because when that mirror shows up, those sensations are just uncomfortable, possibly, right? They're uncomfortable.
Very bitter.
Right.
Very, very bitter.
Very bitter. And so understanding what was the bridge that brought those sensations from bitter to almost empowering, right? Because that's probably where those sensations, that mirror now becomes what empowers you versus what you want to pull away from and resist. How do you get there? What's that like for you?
Well, for me, what happened was I had patterns that were painful in my life. The patterns kept showing up. And I only had two options. I'm either the victim to these patterns, which means people are just untrustworthy. People abandoned, people abuse, people betray, people reject, people will despise. And that is a world that is too painful for me to live in anymore. I'd come to that place in my life.
Right.
And in duality, both are true. So it wasn't that was wrong. I wasn't trying to disprove it. What I was trying to do is align myself with the opposite of it, if that makes sense. So in other words, I have these painful patterns that keep repeating in my life. and I need to figure out what in me is attracting and aligning with this pattern. And that means that I now have to be a co-creator to my patterns or of my patterns.
Be accountable in a way.
To be accountable. So what I had to do is I had to say, yes, abandonment is a thing that happens. But if I wanted the opposite of abandonment to show up in my life, according to Brene Brown, then what would start to show up would be belonging. Abandonment and belonging have, being two ends of the
spectrum. Yeah.
The spectrum. And so if I was experiencing betrayal, then what I really wanted was loyal. Right. I wanted to be more of those experiences because both were available. But if I keep being a victim to the things that repeat in my life, then I have to be asleep. So I have not awakened.
Right.
Because the victim is never awakened. And I just didn't want to be the victim anymore. And I started to hear one of my patterns was that person abandoned me. That person betrayed me. And so I started looking into this concept of the mirror, which was very, very challenging. But this is the bridge that took me over, is that I realized abandonment and belonging cannot coexist in my experience. I'm either experiencing and believing, telling a story about one and making that story my true story.
Right.
And so what I realized is that all sense of belonging I had given to someone else. And when I give it to someone else, I'm now self-abandoning my belonging to me. And I'm saying, you need to do things that allow me to feel like I belong because I cannot figure out the things to do that allow me to belong to me. So for me to experience belonging, I need you to take care of that for me.
Yeah.
Here's the interesting thing that I found out. By the self-abandonment, I was only going to experience the abandonment from others. That became the mirror. Because I've already abandoned myself. So I cannot be abandoned when I belong to myself, regardless of what other people do.
Right. You were standing on the spectrum of abandonment and wanting belonging.
Yeah.
You're standing on you're at this end of the pole.
Yeah.
You got to find a way. We got to find our true self, which is probably somewhere. I mean, we're always belonging to ourselves, but somewhere in along the spectrum is, this is me.
Yeah. So what happened with me was that all of a sudden I was like, well, why don't I belong to myself? Why do I keep giving my sense of belonging to someone else? Well, why don't I just give it to myself? Because it's there, but I'm not accepting it and I'm not receiving it.
Right.
So what is it that I believe about me? And where did that belief come from?
Yeah.
And what that did is that took me down this path of identifying or becoming aware of my own emotional wounds and traumas that I had about me. And so, Eckhart Tolle says that the awakening to our consciousness first comes from awareness. And for me, the awareness came for what my emotional wounds and traumas were, because that's what I was putting out there. That's what I was accepting.
Yeah.
That's what was showing up, because that's what was mirroring back to me. The other thing that I noticed about it was that anybody that I was trying to give my sense of belonging to and they accepted it did not belong to themselves. Because if I really belong to me and you come to me in a sense of codependency, but I have self-belonging, I'm going to read your codependency from a mile away. And I know that doesn't work. And the reason I know that doesn't work is because I now have learned to belong to myself. When I learn to belong to myself, now the only thing I want is for you to know that you belong to you. And so if you come to me with codependency, thinking that I'm going to make you enough, I'm going to provide you with your sense of belonging, the only person that can do that is someone who belongs to themselves. But what they know is that belonging comes from self-belonging. So I'm not going to accept your codependency. I'm going to help you become aware of what your emotional wounds and traumas are, so that you then will all of a sudden realize, oh, those aren't true. I am enough. I now belong to myself. Now, what two people who come together who have their own sense of belonging, what they create is a true partnership that's based in sovereignty rather than the codependency. And so a buddy of mine, you remember Derek?
I think so.
Derek and I were chatting about sovereignty, and he came up with this gorgeous definition of sovereignty. Right. And he said, what it is the ability to walk alone together. Because if I'm just able to walk alone sufficiently, I'm independent.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And that can be very lone wolf. And some of my buddies, that were Green Berets or Navy SEALs, they've taught me and mentored me that the lone wolf never survives. Never survives. And so it looks tough and it looks great, but it's a facade. It's fake. And you need a team, you need a family, you need friends. You've got to have that. So then how do I get my friendship when I want my belonging to come from someone else? Well, the only thing that can come from that is codependency. So then we're betraying each other, we're abandoning each other, we're bumping into each other and hurting each other. And that was never our intention. But it's coming because I first abandoned myself and tried to get it from you. So when I went and looked at my emotional wounds and traumas, and I was like, oh, I have these beliefs that I believe I'm not enough. And so I'm really abandoning myself. I'm misusing myself. I'm betraying myself. So then I just said, okay, well, I've got to go find my wholeness. And I really authentically have to start realizing what is my wholeness.
Right. From scratch.
Yeah. And one of my friends, I was just chatting with him like a week ago, like 5 days ago. Yeah. And we were talking about wholeness. And he said, will you define for me what your definition of wholeness is? Because I'm tired of hearing and reading all the posts on wholeness. And what it looks like to me is bypassing a bunch of my stuff.
Right.
And I said, that's often how it is communicated. I don't know if it's communicated intentionally that way, but maybe just poorly articulated that way. But real wholeness is to integrate all my parts.
Right.
It's all the parts that some of it's just ugly. Some of it's dark. Some of it's light. Some of it's beautiful.
Right.
I have my deficiencies. There's times that I can be very impatient.
Yeah.
And I have my excellences. There's times that I can be very patient. And instead of shaming and blaming myself for not being enough, I can just say, okay, well, here's a part that needs to be loved. Here's a part that's not that beautiful, that needs a hug. And it's what makes me me. And when I then will accept that, take accountability for that, the ability to account for what is without finding fault, then I'll say, well, this part is also still painful. So I'm going to make some adjustments in my life while I'm hugging this and embracing this pain, but I'm also going to make some adjustments. And this is what I've seen a lot of people think, is that when we talk about wholeness, we're bypassing those shadow parts.
Yeah.
Carl Jung said, shadow work is the work of the heart warrior. And it's like, yep, I've got to bring in all of it without it needing to be any different than it is. And by making and embracing my deficiency or my weakness being enough, then I think the God within us will start to make those changes to where my impatience will start to diminish and my patience will start to grow.
Right.
But if I'm shaming my impatience will only grow and my patience will shrink.
Right. 100%. And if we don't love, accept, include all of who we are, we do not have a capacity or a container to be able to do that in anybody else.
Yeah, right.
It just
Right.
doesn't exist. Like we don't have the tool.
Because everything is a mirror to me. So if I can't do it to me and you're a mirror of me, then I can't do it to you.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. Codependency tries to make an argument that you can.
Yeah.
Right. Codependency is like, no, they'll make you enough.
Yeah. Well, and
it doesn't work.
And just listening to you, the pain, because like as a female, and maybe it's just me, but I feel like a codependent type personality is what I am. That's like a good woman. Like that's a good loving woman.
No. I think you're right. I just want to validate that. I do think that there is a place in the box, in the 2D world, on the shadow side.
Yes.
That is a good woman.
Right.
But if we move into the sunshine, if we move into the cube where there's a plurality of options and everything is forward, you cannot get there without sovereignty.
Yes.
So the codependent woman cannot get into the world of everything as a movement forward without being sovereign.
I get it. I totally get what you're saying. I can feel the sensations in my body that say, I know, can you help me?
Yeah.
Which is like, that's the opposite. It's like, that's the codependency. Can you help me? I mean, I feel that in my, okay, I get what you're saying. And I want, because I get what you're saying. I remember waking up one morning, it was a Sunday morning. I woke up, my eyes opened up, and it was like, I need to read that book, Codependent No More. Like I had to drive straight to the thing and buy it. Like I bought the book, the workbook, and the audiobook, and was reading it within an hour. I knew I had to do that. Like that was like, and since then I've read, several of those books, so the concept is, I get it. And I've even created like a step program because of that book, how that's what helped. It's like, okay, how do I get myself out of it? Because it's so overwhelming. So one step at a time, through that. But I think what you're saying, I mean, oh my gosh, I know how can we support people enough in themselves fully 100% so that they have the capacity to be able to make those changes or embrace more. That's probably the best way. Embrace more.
Yeah, I feel like one of the hardest parts is that to have consciousness, you've got 3 tiers of it. You've got consciousness, then you've got subconscious, and then you have unconscious. And that unconscious level is where they say shame resides. And so, I had a partner who I just loved. I would wake up in the middle of the night, not realizing I was awake. I was like sleep. I wasn't walking anywhere. I would just wake up like unconscious. And apparently she always told me in the morning time, I would wake her up in the middle of the night and I would grab her by the face and I would say, I love you so much. You don't know how wonderful you are. And then I'd like fall back asleep or I'd just like lay down and I was still asleep. She would always tell me, you did it again. And I would never have, it was like my soul just loved everything about her. And one of the things that was so difficult that I wish I knew now, I handled it as best as I could. I have empathy for that. But man, if there was a DeLorean, I would go back in time and I would relive it. And because I would do it differently, because the thing she could never embrace was she could never embrace her parts, her shadow parts. Those things became evidence to her that she wasn't enough, which Brene Brown says, to not be enough is shame. And And what I've realized, I used to, I was so disheartened and so, that would cause me to feel so much despair, so much hopelessness, to love someone so much in my soul and to them not love themselves.
Yeah.
And what I realized was that it actually was not about her. What she was mirroring to me, now that I look back on it, what she was mirroring to me was that there were parts of me that I just could not love. And I could feel this pain about her not being able to love her, but really the pain was the parts that I couldn't love about me.
Wow.
And it's hard stuff.
Yeah, that's it, and hard, like physically painful. Those emotions, physically
100%,
painful.
100%.
Yeah.
And that ultimately led us to separating. And in that separation, there came more pain because I was separating from someone that just my soul absolutely loved. And my reasoning behind it, my evidence that I had, was that I didn't feel seen. I didn't feel heard. And when you don't feel seen and you don't feel heard, you don't feel like you belong. But see, there's the problem, is that I was wanting her. I was wanting my sense of belonging to exist within her, when really it didn't exist within me. And so there were parts of me that I didn't see and I didn't hear. And so there was parts of me that I didn't feel belonged to me. So I needed her to change and I needed her to be different so that I could feel enough, so that I could feel like I belonged and I had a place. But it had nothing to do with her. I had all the evidence at the time that it did. But now looking back, that everything is a mirror. It's like, oh, I didn't have space for you to not love you because me not loving me was taking up all my bandwidth.
Right.
Had I loved me and found that love within me, well, I would have had plenty of bandwidth for you to go along that journey. And we could have walked together alone and chosen in to that more and more and more as I was developing my sovereignty, and could have just been a patient support and be like, yeah, I know what it's like to not love parts of me. I know how hard that struggle is. You'll get there because I got there, right? That would have been my conversations. And I just can't think of having a better partner that can hold that space while you're trying to overcome your shame. And I couldn't hold it for myself, and so I definitely couldn't hold it for someone else. And so I chose to separate, and I think the mirror would have saved it. I think we see so many divorces because we don't understand the mirror. I think the mirror saves marriages is what I think.
Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss part 2 of this amazing conversation with Hugh Vail. And if you like this conversation, please leave a review. Feel empowered every day with wholeness videos, meditations, downloads, classes, and more by joining the Wholeness Library at thewholenessnetwork.com.